Hello. Shira and Charity are not John and Sam. We weren't in Las Vegas either. We were in Chicago. When I put my tie on the doorknob, I meant it. I didn't understand why somebody would go to an event where they were trying to procure a job and just haphazardly mention in the elevator that they had been a part of, what did he say? Disabling all of the American nuclear warheads. Who looks at a woman in the elevator and says, "When I was in the Air Force, I helped disable all of the American nuclear warheads"? He was African American, very tall. I guess some would consider it attractive. I was supposed to compete with him in a completely contrived scenario, but I ended up failing. When we went to the chemical factory, there weren't enough spoons for the man who ended up putting the event on. He might have gotten to eat in the meal, but if he did it without utensils. I know what you want. I know you've already stolen it, and I know you've already used it for nefarious purposes. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty certain it is what Beau Biden's father engaged a commercial transactional process around last week that is now responsible for multiple deaths and a volley of fireworks. Hmm? Yes, it is. I mean, there were all kinds of indicators leading up to it, but you guys just can't help yourself. My Vegas is different than your Vegas. You still haven't answered for the Hoover Commission. Either of them. We're over 70 years down the road. Long time to just be completely derelict in your official duties because you're too busy trying to make nuclear showgirls. Didn't you learn your lesson with Mr. Adelson? It's completely out of place. Now I know you want to try to have some sort of rupture to give you your moment of sanctification in your completely unholy scenario. That's part of what's going on in Dallas right now. You want to turn Fat Man and Little Boy into the Madonna and the teenage boy that she is going to welcome into ascension into Mohammedism. She's going to be his Khadijah, the mercantile, elder, middle-aged woman that takes him through the ways, shows him the ropes when it comes to commercialized sexuality and all of the revolutionary moments it entails. And then him in the prime of his life, struggling as he can to assert his manhood, whatever manners are available. If he lives, he might get a chance to what? Aspire to become one of you? Are you ever going to let him in the casino? Or are you going to let him play some little craps game in the alley and maybe join him with a six-pack of beer when you have some junk bonds you need to wave off? I've been watching it for years. That's all the Texas legislature is really focused on right now, except for legalized marijuana. But you don't even want to celebrate our proud history of the Bracero program and give our agricultural sector that kind of a chance. You're too busy trying to figure out a way to reclassify pesticides in order to wave them off on somebody else's children. You still haven't gotten the Madonna and child off the bottom of the channel. I'm not inclined to give you that anymore. Different time frame. We have more relevant time frames to deal with right now, such as March 11th, 2019. Actually, it was transmitted on the 10th, but it was presented in a formal written version and provided as necessary. Let me read very excerpts. I have contacted you previously in one way or another regarding Harvey Point. I am further concerned that they targeted me after referral through a workforce development program. I now understand it to be acts of treason and terrorism. Finally, I understand a specific method by which the sorts of acts of terrorism and treason I have witnessed and attempted to report for over 3 years now can be effectuated. Additionally, it is more than concerning that industries, such as the ones with which I was formerly employed and or that I was recruited as a student to study, ostensibly for later employment, would accept individuals previously determined to require current ingestion of mind-altering substances as treatment for disability. But that's not the one you're really interested in. See, in whatever this paradigm of torment is, you need something, what? There's audio in the background? Something that provides a nice possibility for visual representation, maybe in the demographically correct alignment or ascribement, depending upon the specific version of the product line for the specific audience. You just want to hope that you don't get that whole Saudi to Pakistan conversion that got worked out a few years ago that we've been having so many problems with, huh? Well, then let me read it for you. I'll read the whole thing. March 8th, 2019. Dear Torquedor, as a statement to your inquisitional position, I proffer compelled statement of faith. It is the truth regardless of whatever consequences. I do not believe in the blood oath of Jesus Christ, which often preaches invocation during sermons concerning the washing in the blood of Jesus, as if it will cleanse us of our sins. I believe this is heresy against God and against the Christed One. I believe the Christed One was a prophet of the Jewish people, and his destiny was to attempt to renegotiate the covenant of the people of Israel with God in light of the material conditions of the Jews under Roman occupation and the straying of the Jewish and temple leadership from the original covenant. Much of this had to do with the requirements concerning blood lineage as proof of one's belonging to the original tribes of Israel. I believe the Christed One was sent to assist those who may have been Jewish but for whatever reason were disassociated from their blood lineage as a member of the original tribes, or may have been invited by God to become in covenant with him, as occurred throughout the Jewish history, during periods when God would say to the Jewish people that in their fall from observance of his covenant, he had chosen other people to be in covenant with, until such time as the Jews, who were already provided with what they needed to maintain the covenant, returned to adherence to the covenant. I believe he was prevented from fulfilling his destiny, but I do not believe the Christed One is accurately reflected in the teachings of what was accepted as the primary canonical gospels of the traditions of Christianity that formed as derivations of the Roman Catholic Church. I cannot say much about other traditions of Christianity, but central to my faith is an understanding that the Christed One's primary destiny was to return the Jews of the chosen people of the one true God to appropriate adherence to the covenant. That did not, however, allow for a capacity of enlightened men and women to redefine on conscious terms what the covenant with God would be. You see, now it's changed. You've added that not. Let us read this part again. I cannot say much more about other traditions of Christianity, but central to my faith is an understanding that the Christed One's primary destiny was to return the Jews of the chosen people of the one true God to appropriate adherence to the covenant. That did, however, allow for a capacity of enlightened men and women to redefine on conscious terms what that covenant with God would be. In other words, I believe insofar as the Christed One was sent by God for a specific purpose, it was because God was ready to redefine his relationship with the Jewish people, and the Christed One was intended to be one among many other Christed Ones that were to engage with God in the redefinition of the covenant. I do not know if anyone else believes as I do. I do, however, believe that with the profundity of the deviation from anything close to a moral or ethical comportment, that now is not the time for a less formal understanding of the requirements of the covenant, and that rather now is a time for return to the most basic prescriptions, as to acclimate oneself and one's community with the purpose of adherence to such a covenant for later redefinition. It is as if a moral and spiritual chastity is required for sanctification in the face of what are collective affronts before God. I do not like that this is the way it is, but it is pointless to argue for an alternative when there is no peace to be had in justifying rebellion against something as simple as the purity of tradition. To engage in sexual or sensual licentiousness while we are morally and economically subjugated to unholy people is pointless. It is rather to return to an equality in adherence to the covenant that will provide us with the moral fortitude necessary to successfully defeat those who demand our subjugation. Abnegation of the tradition at this point is not justified. It is more than an attempt to abnegate the tradition. It's because there is a spiritual regression that seeks instead to justify tolerance of and normalization to vice and sin, and expect to be an inheritor of a legacy that cannot be sustained long term. It is not important so much to me that others do as much as I do in this seeking as it is that I do not deny that I do believe that this is the truth of God is revealed to me throughout my life. On the other hand, as the history of the Jewish people is one of community, I cannot say I am a Jew without adherence to appropriate customs that are canonically determined and defined in accordance with tradition. I do believe I was accepted into an invitation to engage a process by which to convert officially in 1995, but that at the time there was a specific path I had to follow for fulfillment of the covenant I have with God and my own relationship with God. I understand it is an important story in experiencing exile, empathy with persecution, alienation from community, testing my faith after witnessing betrayal of the ways by those who are supposed to safeguard them, and attempting to maintain a vigilance in my faith despite being subjected to recurrent representations of sin and defilement of what I understand to be holy. As such, I am irreproachable in a manner, but I am also alone, and I am also fallen, for I have no support. I am further increasingly unwilling to accept versions of Christianity that profane God with their heretical blood oath requirement, as well as what I understand to be a profanation of the law of sacrifice for the forgiveness of sins, as is demonstrated via remonstrations that one accept that God so loved the world he sent his only begotten Son to die for us. I understand that God did not even require the first with whom he made the covenant to sacrifice his Son, and to think that later God would specifically select among man a son to be sacrificed for the sins of the people is to put devotion to the people ahead of God. To do this is to remove the sanctity of each individual's relationship with God and with each other, as well as an explicit violation of the rules of ritual purification and the maintenance of the covenant of God with his people. There is an important role in the symbolic sacrifice of animals instead of man that is performed by those who have done what is necessary to be in God's favor for this role. It is morally wrong to permit people who are not appropriately qualified or sanctified or instructed to participate in these such roles, and it is morally wrong to forego them and their requirements, which includes, if necessary, negotiation regarding the present material conditions as an individual and a community, an attempt to get around God by putting everything on one person, especially God's only Son. This is especially heretical to the Christed One, as he was an important member of the Jewish tradition, and to reduce him to a mere sacrifice for others, when what he was doing was seeking to be among his people to embrace a new paradigm with God in the fullness of the embodiment of godliness and communion with the people of God, is heartbreaking. And I believe it is heartbreaking to God himself. This is especially manifested as heartbreak in refrains that Christians are the children of God, as if God would permit the sacrifice of his only begotten Son, then God would permit the sacrifice of any and every child. I do not believe in this God, and believe any who purport to speak or minister on behalf of such a God are completely ungodly. Finally, is the matter of inheritance of the covenant of the chosen people. God made a specific choice in choosing who it was he did, how he did. Insofar as the Christed One came to renegotiate the covenant, he did so as a Jew and in accordance with an understanding that he was filled with godliness in his relationship with God. As such, any later adherents that wish to say that the legacy of the thousands of years of Jewish tradition and history that predated the Christed Ones are available for inheritance by those who accept the false representation of the Christed One and what his role is in the Jewish tradition are committing a great sin. God outlined rules and procedures for appropriate worship. The Christed One came to organize a redefinition with an understanding of what it meant for men and women to embrace their godliness directly. Recall that God did not want to appoint a king for the Jewish people. They demanded, and so he did. In the same manner, were men and women to embrace their inner godliness and remonstrate to God to reconsider their roles and relationships, I believe it is possible to do so and pleasing to God to do so. However, the Christed One was not successful at the time. And thus far, no one else has been either. Just because there have been 2,000 years of misrepresentation of the covenant God made with his chosen people and the role that the Christed One played in this legacy does not make it any more valid. I may or may not be successful in my own efforts at this time, but that is not the point. I cannot accept a false version of God or a false version of the story of the Christed One. Need you continue? It hasn't changed. It's not going to. I also do not believe it is appropriate to try to take religious or holy items or people and desanctify them to be used as some sort of prurient flip in your nuclear paradigms. If you have a spiritual calling to attempt to provide protection against a nuclear attack, or in consideration of the fact that we have already been subjected to, among other things, great moral harms based upon abuse of the power that comes with splitting the atom, and that is one thing. But cease and desist this mockery. I do not authentically express myself in this form very frequently. I am now. I do not want to have to return in a more vindictive form, but I will if I must. This has gone on way too long. You've got this all wrong. Just because your carbon-based body has achieved a certain kind of wrinklage, or you've been able to consume oxygen for a certain number of years chronologically, doesn't mean you understand what it takes to endure. This is what I've seen. All you've done is flaunt feebleness in front of me for years. It's a waste of time.